is Richard Dennis, a trader who started with just $1,600 and ended up with $350 million. Sounds impossible, right? But here's the shocking part. He didn't just do it for himself, he proved anyone could learn his system. He trained complete beginners, people with zero background in markets, and together they generated $175 million in profits. So what was the secret playbook that created millionaires almost overnight? In this video, I'm going to break down the exact rules of his legendary turtle trading strategy so you can see how it actually worked. The debate, talent versus teachability. In the early 1980s, the trading world was split over one key question. Were great traders born with raw instinct, or could the skills be learned? Most people inside the industry leaned toward natural talent. They saw trading like an art form, something that required a mysterious intuition about when prices were about to turn. If you didn't have that sixth sense, you were out of luck. William Eckhart, who was both a mathematician and a trader, represented this school of thought clearly. He argued that teaching trading rules was pointless because no formula could replace natural ability. This view fit well with that decade's trading environment, when floor traders shouted orders in chaotic pits and lived off gut reactions that seemed impossible to capture in fixed rules. But standing across from him was Richard Dennis. He looked at the same markets and came to the opposite conclusion. Dennis believed that instincts were overrated compared to rules, discipline, and probabilities. He insisted that if you could give people a structured framework, when to buy, when to sell, how much to risk, anyone could learn to trade profitably. That idea was radical at the time, partly because it seemed to deny the role of individual brilliance in a field dominated by aggressive personalities who prided themselves on fearless decision-making. To put his theory to the test, Dennis launched an experiment that would later become one of the most famous stories in trading history. He placed a newspaper ad, interviewed applicants, and selected a mixed group of 23 students. None of them were experienced financial professionals. One had been a security guard, another was a professional blackjack player, others had backgrounds in music, engineering, or even as clerks. The entire point was to prove that an ordinary person with no special market insight could still succeed if taught the right rules. From the very beginning, critics thought the experiment was reckless. If great traders couldn't be manufactured, then Dennis was about to throw away a small fortune training amateurs to play with real money. Skeptics saw the project as a publicity stunt destined to fail. After all, how could someone with no background in finance possibly compete with seasoned veterans who had spent years watching screens, listening to market flow, and building relationships on the trading floor? Yet, against the expectations of nearly everyone, the results were nothing short of staggering. Over the course of 5 years, Dennis's group generated more than $175 million in profits. These weren't paper gains or simulated trades. This was real money moving through futures markets at a massive scale. Each trade followed the same guiding set of rules Dennis believed in, and one after another, the group proved him right. The surprise wasn't only that they made money, but that they did it consistently. So the obvious question is, what exactly were those rules that allowed complete novices to achieve results veteran traders thought impossible? The core rules that created millionaires. How is it that a simple checklist of rules outperformed traders who relied on instinct and intuition? The answer begins with Dennis's strict approach to risk. His first commandment was that no trade should ever put more than 2% of total capital at risk. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a non-negotiable cap. By setting that boundary, losses were always small enough to survive, no matter how volatile the market looked on a given day. This number acted like a fuse in an electrical system. Even if emotions ran high or the market moved violently, the account could only take a controlled hit. That allowed the turtles to live to trade the next day without ever risking a wipeout. But position size wasn't random. This is where Dennis was different from most traders of the time. Instead of placing fixed amounts, he tied position sizing to volatility through a measurement known as the average true range. or ATR. The ATR calculated how much an asset typically moved in a given time frame. If a market was quiet and stable, the turtles could take larger positions. If it was swinging wildly, position sizes automatically shrank. It created a natural balance where each trade had roughly the same risk, regardless of whether they were trading wheat futures, currency markets, or metals. This approach raised an important question. Why focus on volatility instead of trying to predict the market direction? The answer was that volatility determined survival. A trader who bet large during a chaotic swing could get destroyed even if they were right about the long-term trend. By letting volatility dictate exposure, Dennis shifted the game away from guessing outcomes and toward managing probabilities, which is where his system drew its strength. When it came to actually getting into trades, Dennis trained his students to look for breakouts. That meant waiting until a market decisively crossed a previous high or dipped below a previous low before entering. It was a simple structural signal. If prices broke out, the turtles assumed a longer trend might follow. They weren't predicting why a breakout might happen, only reacting when it did. Buying strength and selling weakness might sound basic, but combined with tight risk control, it became incredibly powerful. That was the core of the turtle system. It accepted losing often, with the understanding that a handful of runaway winners could more than make up for it. Mathematics, not market predictions, drove profitability. The turtles weren't asked to be fortune tellers, they were asked to be consistent with numbers, because the numbers, not their guesses, were what created wealth.
Disciplined psychology and why most traders fail. If the rules were so effective, why isn't everyone using them today? On paper, the strategy looks straightforward. Cut losses fast, risk only a small portion on each trade, and hold on when the market trends. The real obstacle isn't understanding the rules. It's sticking to them when they clash with human psychology. Most people are wired to avoid repeated pain, and in trading,
that pain shows up as a string of small losses. Dennis built those losses into the system deliberately, yet most traders can't tolerate watching their account drip down trade after trade without giving in to frustration. He prepared his turtles for the reality that they could lose 5, 6, even 10 trades in a row. The key was that none of those losses would be large. But even though the math still worked, the emotional toll was heavy. It required discipline to keep executing the same entries after so many losing attempts, especially when markets seemed unpredictable or others around them were questioning the method. Many traders outside his experiment would have abandoned the rules at that point, choosing instead to chase short-term wins to ease the discomfort of constant setbacks. That tendency is just as common today. New retail traders often quit after a streak of losses because it feels personal. They believe the strategy is broken or that they lack skill. The turtles were shown that the losses weren't a reflection of them. They were simply the cost of staying in the game until a major trend unfolded. This was one of the deepest lessons from the experiment. Progress in trading often hides behind a wall of frustration most people never climb over, and here's where the paradox comes in. The very moves that feel most natural for most people are exactly the ones that sabotage long-term results. Cutting profits early because it feels safer, that kills the big winners the system relies on. Avoiding the next breakout after several losses, that risks missing the one trade that would recover everything. True success required behavior that felt uncomfortable, staying in winners far longer than instinct suggested, and continuing to take signals even when the last handful had failed. There are stories of turtles who suffered weeks of nothing but losses, only to finally catch a once-in-a-year move in currencies or commodities. By following the checklist without deviation, they watched one trade multiply enough to dwarf all their earlier struggles. That is how the math unfolded, not over 20 trades or even 50, but over hundreds. The real advantage wasn't a secret formula or hidden indicator. It was the simple combination of strict risk control, consistency, and refusing to abandon the process when it felt uncomfortable. Every trader today has access to the same principles, but very few will actually apply them with that level of patience. most give in to emotions long before the math has time to work. That's why the edge will never disappear. The real challenge is not finding the perfect setup, it's training yourself to follow a process relentlessly. If you can master that, the rest will take care of itself.